All right, all right. I think it's time we start get going. Hey, everyone. Happy afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where in the world some of the folks are joining us from. We got folks on from, I think, all over the place a little bit here, but nonetheless, it's great to see everyone. Thank you for being here. This is part two of our CISO's Guide to Efficient and Effective SecOps. This is part two, reducing storage spend. So the focus of this four-part series, everyone, just to give you a little bit of a background or a precursor as to what it is that we're doing here. This is geared towards helping understand some of the fine value points that LimaCharlie offers at a high level, meaning this is a problem that I see enterprises facing all the time. Let's talk about it. Last edition, we talked about tool sprawl. Today, we're going to be talking about reducing storage spend. And I really think these are areas, in addition to the other concepts we're going to talk about in future weeks, where organizations are just kind of feel stuck, right? Tool sprawl is one last week that I've talked to folks that are just kind of stuck. They're like, yeah, Matt, I have 50, 60, 70 tools. I'm just stuck because I need them all, or I'm signed into a contract, or they offer coverage, or they cover gaps or areas that I don't know if I have coverage anywhere else. They just kind of stick and get stuck with whatever's there. Storage spend falls into that same category for me. I find that storage spend is one that the security industry has come to just kind of accept. Like, okay, here's our monthly bill for whatever thing. It's a lot, but we need the data, so whatever. Let's move on. And I really don't like that approach. And I don't like how, as an industry, we joke around a lot about the costs of certain storage solutions or certain storage options. And there's, definitely articles and research out there of companies that have kind of moved their own storage capabilities internally, whether on-prem works for them or whether it doesn't. It's really a toss-up as to what is the best strategy for you and your organization. But I do think there is a successful cloud-native approach that can be taken, and we're going to talk about that today, in addition to some other things that we're going to mention as well. Number one. Number two, the other thing that I will drill into a little bit today is also going to be optimizing the way that I use my data and optimize storage as well. This is another area where I think there's some inefficiencies that happen, and this is a concept that we'll talk about in future editions of this kind of CISO's guide as well. But we'll mention a few of those as we go on and get into it. My name is Matt, everyone. I'm the lead solutions engineer over here at LimaCharlie. Hit me up or find me in one of our social medias if you need to, LinkedIn, Slack, community Slack, whatever it might be. And I'm happy to kind of drill into things there. The first high-level topic that I'm going to get into from a storage perspective is going to be data retention. So let's back up for a moment. And when we talk about storage spend, we need to understand that there are external pressures that sometimes guide what CISOs have to deal with here from a external storage perspective, from a storage spend perspective. And that can range from everything from retention. It can range to needs, accessibility. It can range from compliance. We're going to talk about all of these. But this is an important understanding for those of you who are finding ways to reduce that storage spend, is that you do have external pressures you have to deal with. We don't want to remove any of those external pressures. We want to help you kind of uncover and then find ways to optimize them. So when getting into the idea or concept of data retention, I start to think of what is it that the organization needs, because this is going to define some of my storage strategy going forward, okay? Obviously, the first one is going to be, and I don't even have it written down here, is just going to be how much data do we actually need? But there's ways to kind of cut down what that population looks like. The first one is going to be differentiating critical versus non-critical data. Folks, there's a myriad of ways to slice and dice what critical versus non-critical is. Let's take the critical category first. I would argue a critical category from a data perspective is data that you're using for detection and response purposes, for security alerting, for telemetry, for observation, for IT ops, network engineering, whatever it might be. That's critical data. Necessary because it drives the functionality of a group or of a BU or of an objective. Non-critical data might be, overkill. Things that we might need just in case, maybe. Who knows? I'm not really too sure what it is, but we're storing everything, so why not just throw this in there as well? Non-critical data might fall into, logs for custom applications that that don't really speak much to the function or operation of it. They just are data points that we've kept. It might be data that's just kind of left lying around in places. So you might think of demo environments or POC environments or testing and production or testing development phases before things go into production. That's data that might also just be non-critical. It might be test data that you don't need. It might be training data that you don't need, or it might be legacy data that doesn't have any retention wrapped around it. It also doesn't need to be part of the organization. Another big important need for data retention is going to also be retention periods and how long you need to hold on to something for. The easiest delimiter is long-term versus short-term. We'll talk about compliance in just a moment here, but compliance is going to be your biggest driver of short-term versus long-term data retention, and maybe how you kind of guide and weave that policy through, or how you apply the needs of those retention requirements, number one. Number two is also going to be, what does your team or your organization feel like you need from a retention perspective? This one's a little trickier. So one of the things that I've encouraged a lot of organizations to do, and for those CISOs who are watching this, I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. Sit down with your team and take a really hard look. Call it an audit day or whatever you want. Buy everyone lunch. You'll be fine. But take an audit day and think, what types of data is the security team collecting, and what types of data is the security team actually using? And what is the gap and the disparity between those two? And then start to fill in the blanks with dollar amounts of how much you're retaining versus how much you're actually using. And we're going to talk about this when we get into data workflow in just a moment. But there is, I almost promise and guarantee, I won't guarantee, but I almost do, there is a cost reduction to be found in just that one question alone. And then last but not least, another data retention kind of thought that goes into this is retention policies aligning with business goals. Segued a little bit into this one, but business goals might be more than just a security approach. This might be more aligned with, hey, we are rolling, our products roll out in a 6 to 18 month window. So we need to have data to help validate that. We might have long-term contracts that don't have a compliance in place, that don't require long-term data storage, but we want to maintain data for the length of our contracts, just because in case anything happens, we want to be able to refer back to it. From a security perspective, I'll talk about who needs access to what, but security is another area where, what are the goals of the security team? When you organize threat hunts, how far back do you want to go in time? If you uncover an incident, is there a point where you say, we don't have data past this time or before this time, therefore we're just going to have to accept where it's at? We need to get away from this adage of we need everything forever, everywhere. Unless there is an external pressure that drives you to do that, we should be moving closer to a point of, we're going to discover breaches or data intrusions or cyber threats earlier. We're going to work on better detection and response capabilities. We're not here to talk about detection and response today, but detection and response capabilities impact data storage and data retention costs. Because if your mindset of the security team is, well, if we get breached, we'll just go back and look at all the evidence to do an investigation. Unfortunately, you're in a tough spot because you're relying on everything being there in the past. We're not including adversarial evasion techniques, data deletion techniques, data destruction techniques. And let's also be clear, maybe a ransomware drops and you lose access to everything anyways. I would rather have a data retention business objective that aligns more with, we want to detect faster. We want to operationalize faster. How do we get there? Regulatory and compliance is another big issue. Of course, this is going to be at the top of everyone's mind. Another thing that has to come in mind is, no matter what I say or how I feel about what you might think is a good business practice, if you've got some sort of compliance in there, you've got to do what they say. And this isn't everything inclusive, of course, but if I've got GDPR, HIPAA, some sort of financial regulatory body, if I'm dealing with evidence that's under e-discovery or court cases or subpoenas or things like that, those all factor in. And when I mentioned fines and penalties for non-compliance, you don't want to be the organization that simply said, oh yeah, sorry, we deleted it, even though we knew we were supposed to keep it. In this case, I think an exception has to be made. And what I mean by that is, an exception has to be made not only from a data retention strategy perspective, but also from a budgetary perspective as well. Let's just say I spent a lot of time in the early 2010s doing data collections, forensic acquisitions and stuff that fell under anywhere from 7 to 10 year legal holds based on what was going on. We found ways to optimize the data that was being collected. You don't just throw everything in a bucket and say, well, maybe it will be here in a while. There's ways to deduplicate, there's ways to optimize, but nonetheless, we obviously don't want to keep everything in a hot storage if we don't need to. If there's ways for us to push data out to either a cold storage or a longer term thing, or if I can rotate it regularly, also adhering to compliance requirements is another way, but it is an impact in the industry force or pressure that should be considered. How does LimaCharlie help from a retention perspective? Well, first and foremost, every single data type that you send into LimaCharlie includes a year of data retention. That's everything. If you go and install LimaCharlie EDR sensors, I hold on to the data for a year for you. If you send me a gigabyte of plain text log files that you want to analyze in the platform, we hang on to that for a year as well. All telemetry types are ingested and held onto for a year. That's just included in our pricing. You're not having to guess for the first 365 days in LimaCharlie where the data is at. We're holding on to it for you. If you need more, and we're going to talk about redirecting towards the end, but if you need more or need to reroute data or send it to a cold storage, or you need longer term storage or something like that, then we have output options available for that as well. I will draw a line and say that that year retention is usually a pretty hard line in the data here. And we do recommend if you need longer, we're going to push it out to another area, or we might have a need for some additional processing. Either way, it's about 30 seconds to output data to another location if need be. The next is going to be a little bit of an apprehension towards cloud native storage. And I see this one in talking with a lot of folks. I see it in survey results. I see it in industry forces and things like that, where there's unfortunately a little bit of hesitancy of like, well, do I really want to be doing this or do I not want to be doing it? And I first have to address all the different solutions and capabilities that are out there. And this may be have folks wondering like, wait a second, LimaCharlie, are you a SIEM? Are you a data lake? Is there some new database or some sort of hot fire thing out there I should be using? What are all my different options? Should we just go back to an SQL based? I see everyone having every discussion. And if you keep an eye and pay attention to like the different blog posts that are out there, you'll start to see a lot of varying thoughts of folks coming in and saying, well, we moved all of our data storage to this type of thing because it benefited what we use or it benefited the approach that we take. And that's a very niche requirement. To be able to sit down and understand your storage needs and storage requirements is a niche conversation that is applicable just to you. There was a very famous kind of, I shouldn't say very famous, not like celebrity status, but there was a well-written blog post about an organization, a very well-known video streaming organization that I believe migrated off of one type of cloud functionality to another because they found extreme proficiencies and they found a lot of advantages in doing that. Folks, you need to operate at that scale to recognize those numbers. And I'm not going to argue everyone's scale, but I would argue that there's a few folks that are not operating at that scale where you can say, oh, if we do this, it will save us 2 pennies per processing hour, and that's going to equate to millions of dollars a year. A lot of times you're overpaying for storage simply because you get wrapped up in a tier or in a band that unfortunately kind of locks you in. The other thing that cloud native storage offers is, and this is what hooks everybody in, what gets you there, is the idea and the promise of cost savings. A lot of times those cost savings are very similar to buying an electric vehicle. You're not having to manage infrastructure. You're not having to manage hardware. You're not having to manage hard drives and all those kinds of things. You are going to simply just upload and be done. And of course, you can scale infinitely. That's all great in practice. But when I'm paying to move up in scalability or paying to move up in storage, or I need to commit to a certain level of storage requirements in order to achieve any of these benefits, I'm not really saving much in that case. Another big takeaway here for cloud native storage, or another big win, is look, those of you in your enterprises right now, you've got large footprints. Bringing data out of the cloud and down to an on-prem thing in the name of saving isn't really saving. You're just simply hoping that it's a little cheaper without looking at how much it is over there. And then finally, the flexibility and agility of moving it is also another benefit to cloud native storage. I think these benefits need to be realized. I think they need to be realized, but they also need to be provided in an affordable manner. So there was a 2023 State of the Cloud report that noted that 89% of enterprises have a multi-cloud strategy, which indicates to me that you're comfortable with the cloud because you're embracing multiple clouds that are out there. Let's try and find efficiencies in storage capabilities as well, while making it easy and accessible for my team to use. One little final point that I brought up here is I also work with organizations who are migrating out of some sort of on-prem or existing infrastructure where they are trapped, or they feel like they're trapped in what they've got, and it just seems too much of a mountain to climb up. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to argue that the best type of storage that out there that will help actually reduce your spend is one that's going to allow for a gradual transition, seamless integration with what you've got, and obviously minimize the disruption during your migration there. These 3 points can't be highlighted enough for those of you who are in a situation where you're transferring from one type of data storage solution to another. You're looking for cost optimization. Throw it in the cloud is not cost optimization, because there's a whole lot of engineering, whole lot of implementation, whole lot of decision making that's got to go behind that. I want you to be considerate of those as you work your way up and through it. This is where I think LimaCharlie has one of the most benefits as a SecOps cloud platform. First off, it's pay-as-you-go storage pricing, which means you're going to pay based on number of gigabytes that get uploaded, and that's going to be it. It's a really simple mathematical equation. You want to send me 1 gig, it's X. You want to send me 10 gigs, it's 10 times X. You want to send me 1,000,000 gigs, it's 1,000,000 times X. It's not a tiered storage band. It is a really easy, you send and you pay for what you send. It's infinitely scalable. It's as scalable as the cloud is. I'll just leave it at that. However, there's kind of an important feature that needs to be wrapped around the previous 2 there. I don't want to advertise, send every single thing you have and take all of the problems that were in this platform and migrate them over to that platform. That discussion of niche data requirements and what it is my organization actually needs should be happening at every organization. It should be happening in every security team so that you can scale your data up and down as need be. So when we talk about after action reports and we talk about breach recovery and data consultations and things like that, those are the moments to say, as a security team, we really needed access to X and we didn't have it. Let's include that in our data plan. Or it's a good chance as a security team to step back and say, we don't need ever use access to X, but we have 15 years of it stored up back there. Maybe we should prioritize accordingly. And again, you can go down the road of, well, but what if we need it one day? And I would say, how much are you paying for that giant what if? The other thing that's going to be a huge benefit of a SecOps cloud platform like LimaCharlie is also going to be the inherent security features that you get with this storage strategy as well, which means I'm not asking you to just send everything into one location and then just be done. I want you to send it up and utilize ACLs, and we'll talk about utilization in just a moment, to wrap up and say, who needs access to what? I need that built into my platform as well. All of these features should be standard. They should be table stakes. ACLs, SSO integration, all of those things should be included with your storage platform. They are for us. Last but not least, it's your data. You have access to it. You control who has access to it, and you control who does what with it. It's that simple. I don't want you to send me data with the expectation that it might be mined for some reason or purpose in the future. That's not what we're here for. It's your data. Utilize it as you need to. The third high-level topic that I want to hit on is data management practices. So this is where we're going a little bit further, and we're saying, okay, I've got my data optimized. I've got my data stored in the right place. How do I go about then managing it effectively? The first is going to be, and I kind of led into this a little bit, is going to be secure and accessible storage to the teams that need it. And I'll talk about who those teams are in just a moment. Reducing redundancy. This is going to be another platform assessment. We'll talk about this. I've got a little bit of a diagram to discuss in just a moment, but this is one area where a lot of organizations get stuck and wrapped up in, not only are they paying for data again and again and again to be stored in the same place and whatnot, but they are also inadvertently storing it in multiple different platforms and not even realizing that it's there. Or my favorite one is, you're storing it in multiple platforms and you're pulling from multiple platforms without even knowing that you are pulling from multiple platforms. This doesn't work. One of the best ways to reduce storage spends, and I've said it a couple of times now, is to go and understand the flow of data in your organization and look for ways to minimize and cut that down. I got a 2022 Gartner report highlighting that data quality costs, or poor data quality, was costing organizations an average of $13 million a year. $13 million bucks a year. I don't know, that's at least a couple of security analysts who could be assisting, maybe helping detect and respond better. And then last but not least is obviously going to be improving quality and integrity of that data, because you have certain teams that are going to need access to it. This is where I put on my security hat. When I say people who need access to it, who exactly are we talking about here? Well, I'm going to keep security in the line, but we could include other departments too. Incident response, SOC, threat hunters, your CTI team, if you'd have them, third-party data who might need to be in there, regulatory compliance, IT operations, network engineers. There's a wealth of people in your organization who are going to need access to the data that you've got there. So one of the best data management practices is going to be getting the right data into the right place and giving access to the right people when they need it, and only access to what they need when they need it. Hopefully you're picking up on my underlying theme here. Base level ACLs, which allow me to control who has access to what, should be table stakes for any storage solution that you choose. They are table stakes for us, which means I'm able to control who has access to what at a granular level if need be, and I can distribute amongst teams if needed. I can lock it down from an API perspective. I can lock it down from a UI perspective as well. And this, of course, all comes into the same exact categories of centralized repositories with RBACs and real-time data availability to help really just kind of, get those teams access to what they need at the right time. I want to talk about a workflow here, a data flow optimization in a way that can help kind of illustrate a way to make life easier. I find this to be pretty common. Now, I haven't included any data stores in here, but this is something that I see in a lot of organizations is this idea of source data, wherever it is, an EDR, SaaS platforms, third-party apps, cloud, whatever you want to call it. There's a source. And those source or sources often feed into something that analysts need to use, be it a dashboard, a SOAR platform, ticketing, case management, whatever it might be. A lot of times, this is the most expensive part of your data flow. I have countless conversations with a lot of folks here at LimaCharlie, not at LimaCharlie, but customers of ours. This is the most expensive part that they're dealing with, because inside of these dollar signs right here is that security mindset, that legacy security mindset of you need access to everything, everywhere, every time. So send everything, everywhere, every time up into some sort of a storage solution. Well, unfortunately, that's not even at the analyst workflow stage yet. Unfortunately, if I look over to the right-hand side, where my analysts are actually doing their job is in other platforms. Yes, they're utilizing the data that was sent in, but it's not the most costly part of it. The most costly part is getting that data into a position where they're able to utilize it, which means I'm spending more money on the preparation than I am on the actual analysis. And I have to argue and question, if I'm able to free up some money, what more could my analyst do with that? I talked about this one a little bit earlier as well. This is another thing that I see a big issue with, is I see data being pushed into multiple storage capabilities. And unfortunately, the tools that my analysts are using as part of their workflow or as part of the automation processes or incident response process, whatever it is, they're pulling from different sources without us even knowing about it. The same problem exists, it's just replicated. I've got costly data ingestion, data methods being sent into various storage buckets, whatever they are, and I've got my analysts pulling from different data at different times. The issue here is now you're leading back into last week's topic, which was tool sprawl. This is where I now have analysts having to dig through multiple types of dashboards to find, wait a second, where's this data? Where's that? I've got analysts trying to remember, is the data in this storage bucket? Is it in that storage bucket? Is it in this database? You have to go here to do that. Let's expand that problem outside of security. Network engineers, you need to go here. IT ops, you need to go there. Security, you need to go to this. And so other teams, you need to go to that. I'm distributing my data way too fast. Now, some of you might come back and argue and say, well, Matt, storage 1 is locked down to the security team and storage 2 is locked down to the incident response team. And I would argue and say ACLs should be included in storage and they should be adjusted accordingly as you need them. We shouldn't have to resource and implement another storage requirement just to meet the ACL needs of the organization. I'll pause here and say that compliance can drive this. Compliance or regulatory needs can drive a solution such as this, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to argue and say I think there's still a better way to optimize it. I want to focus on these 2 points right here in the last couple of minutes of our session today. I want to focus on this part of we are likely spending way too much money getting data into a particular place, number one. Number two, there's too many workflows. There's too many arrows in this point. There's far too many arrows that my analyst workflows are sitting on top of. So I got an idea. Why don't we streamline it? Now, you know my streamlining version is going to include LimaCharlie, and it's just going to have to include LimaCharlie. First off, I want to change the diagram around a little bit. I want to put LimaCharlie as the thing that sources feed into. Now, I didn't drop any notes in here other than we should optimize those sources as well, but I've talked about that for 25 minutes now. I want to optimize the data flow that goes into LimaCharlie to make sure it's exactly the data that you need. And then with highly customizable output options, we're going to output only the data we need to the platforms that need them. So I can output specifically to the dashboard platform what it needs access to, because it likely doesn't need access to everything. It doesn't need the data from everything. Now, I view LimaCharlie storage capabilities as a throttle. Let's say your dashboard requires A, B, C, and then you guys go and you retool it, and as a security team, you decide, hey, we actually need A, B, C, D, E, F. Perfect. Come back into LimaCharlie, turn on DEF, you're set. Dashboards are now amped up with the data that you need, or vice versa. Wow, our dashboards are way too cumbersome. We're bringing way too much data in. Let's cut it down. Come back, lower the throttle down. You have exactly what you need. Your SOAR platform might utilize a different type of data set. It might want to work off of alerts or system telemetry. So output just the data it needs to that platform. And then a ticketing systems are meant to be succinct. They're meant to include, and I'm using these just as examples here. You can pick any part of the workflow you want, but a ticketing system is meant to be succinct data. Summary, here's what it is. Here's a link back to the reference. I also drew a little arrow down at the bottom towards long-term retention or any other regulatory or compliance needs that you might have. But let me go back and kind of reiterate what I'm talking about here and why this diagram I think is a much better workflow than this diagram right here. One, I can't change or replace all of the analyst workflow tools, nor do I want to. Not as LimaCharlie, but as a security practitioner. If your team has a security workflow that's working for you, stick with it, absolutely. But I want you to look at the 80 to 90% of data before it gets into your analyst hands. How much is that costing you to get there? We're not going to replace the analyst workflow that's working well, but we can make those data costs a lot more effective. We've got a really good case study of an MDR here in the US that did exactly this. They kept their final stage workflows the same, but it was the data transition process, the infrastructure management that was killing them in the process. They were able to bring those costs down by 6 figures, number one. Number two, sending only what you need to what you need. There's an important distinction of what types of data do I actually need to be sending to my additional third-party analysis platforms. I was working with someone a few months ago who was testing out a brand new kind of AI XDR platform. And the XDR platform was saying, send us your Windows event logs. Okay, perfect. Send them in. They were looking at 5 event IDs. That's it, 5. Y'all know how big Windows event logs are? Imagine turning on the fire hose and then literally asking for 3 drops of water or 5 drops of water in this case. It just didn't work. Those types of data strategies don't make sense for a budget. They don't make sense for a security team. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to argue and say they don't make sense for anyone who's trying to do post hoc analysis. Hey, let me go search through a terabyte of data to try and find a needle in a haystack. I would rather put the data you need in the place that you need it at. So with that said, this was meant to be a really brief discussion on storage spend and areas where I see a lot of pain points for a lot of organizations. Just to kind of reiterate, this is what we're dealing with in a lot of cases. Very expensive storage mechanisms, very expensive transfer mechanisms, tiers, banded pricing, so on and so forth, and then a convoluted way for analysts to access that data. Let's simplify that. Let's ingest data into one place and then use that one place as a hub, use it as a buffer. We're not even getting into the different capabilities that you have just within LimaCharlie, but if you wanted to deploy it and use it as a pass-through just to help streamline that initial 70, 80% of data, we're all for it. You've got the capabilities to do that here. Have the analysts tap into the platforms that they need, accessing only the data that they need access to. And if you need to send data out for compliance reasons, if you need to send data out for long-term retention, if something comes under a hold, if something has some sort of long-term requirement, then send it out as you need to, and then turn it off, turn it on when you need to, as you see things being able to, as you need to ship data out. But it's your data. You should be in complete control of what goes where. And I promise you, after a really quick assessment of what am I sending and how can I bring this down, you'd be surprised. Folks, you'll find 6, 7 figures in costs, depending on how much you're paying now. You'll find 6 to 7 figures of cost reduction in not sending everything to a sink and instead streamlining what those flows look like. So with that said, huge thanks to everyone for joining me here today. I'm Matt over here at LimaCharlie. More than welcome to hit me up in any of the socials. If anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to follow up on, or you're like, hey, Matt, can we have this discussion? Ping me in our community Slack, hit me up an email, matt@limacharlie.io, find me on LinkedIn, wherever. I'm accessible, I'm available. Happy to have this conversation. Let's talk about how we can optimize your data flow and help you find the same cost savings that I help others find on a weekly basis. All right. But that said, everyone, this is part 2. See you back for part 3, which I think will be in 2 weeks from now. We're going to take the week of July 4th and let everyone have that holiday, if you will. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with part 3 of our 4-part CISO effectiveness and efficiency series. But with that said, everyone, thank you. Have a great afternoon, and I'm sure I'll talk to you somewhere.